Cold water, dark night, a crowd that smells like wet straw, wood smoke, and fear. That's where we're starting, right at the edge of the village pond that's doubling as a medieval lie detector. No dramatic lightning strike, no cackling hag in a pointy hat. Just a trembling woman in a coarse linen smock, wrists bound, shins bruised, and half the parish leaning in for the kind of entertainment that makes you question how thin the wall really is between church-going piety and full-blown blood sport. Welcome to a witch trial dunking, the splashy, freezing, rumor-powered spectacle that promised divine truth, but usually delivered hypothermia and a lesson in how panic can turn perfectly average neighbors into a mob scanning the crowd for the next unlucky soul. Let's rewind, because dunking a suspected witch wasn't step 1. It was more like step 4 of a grim recipe that started with gossip. Maybe someone's butter wouldn't churn, or a cow miscarried, or little Tom fell sick after eating bread that had been on the floor longer than Tom's entire life. Whatever it was, fear needed a face to punch, and chances are it landed on a woman who lived a little outside the center of town, geographically, socially, or just in the way she stared too long at storm clouds. Once her name bubbled up, the local authorities, think stern men with parchment fetishes and the lukewarm grasp of biology, had to investigate. They'd visit, take notes on how dusty her doorstep was, maybe paw through her herb jars, definitely count the cats. If the cats glared, as cats tend to, well, there you go, familiars. Next came proof. And medieval proof was anything but CSI level. A neighbor swore the accused cursed her beer. A midwife muttered about a suspicious birthmark. Someone remembered she once talked to herself near a hedgerow. Layer rumor on rumor, season with doctrinal paranoia, and presto, the accused landed in a makeshift cell where daylight squeezed through a hole small enough to remind her how temporary breathing felt. This is where the dunking idea entered, courtesy of a warped reading of Trial by Ordeal. The notion that God would literally rig physics to reveal innocence. Water, blessed during baptism, would reject evil and float the witch, which meant if you bobbed like an anxious cork, you were guilty. If you sank, you were pure, and presumably on a collision course with the Lord far sooner than planned. Picture the pond again. It's late autumn, because of course it is. The trees are skeletal, the wind slices sideways, and every ripple looks like shattered black glass. 2 constables march the accused forward. The crowd presses in, a human tide of wool cloaks and lantern light. Kids crane their necks, half horrified, half thrilled to be awake after curfew. Someone coughs, another mutters a prayer too quietly to matter. This isn't a courtroom. This is interactive torture disguised as spiritual due diligence. Bindings vary by county and decade, but here's a common setup. Her thumbs tied to opposite big toes behind her back, hog tie style. Why? Supposedly to prevent clandestine swimming, because obviously a woman half strangled by rope is an Olympic threat. Sometimes they looped a rope under her torso. Call it a lifeline, call it insurance, call it the medieval version of a PR clause. Theoretically, it let them yank her out before drowning, though records read like disclaimers written after the fact. She was recovered somewhat late. Translation, oops. They lower her. First her heels kiss the water, then her calves, knees, ragged breath turning to clouds. The surface closes over her shoulders with a sound like a door slamming. What happens next depends on 50 variables. Body fat, lungful of air, how tightly she's trussed, who's holding the rope, whether the townsfolk lean forward as one,
They usually do macabre choreography. If she floats immediately, the gasp from the watchers isn't relief, it's vindication. See, the water refuses her. Cheers rise, accusations swell, and somewhere a scribe is already sharpening his quill to write convicted. But floating isn't as mystical as they thought. Human bodies are moderately buoyant. Add trapped air and cloth and a frantic arch of the back, and you'll bob enough to make ignorant minds whisper, witchcraft.
If she sinks instead, silence falls. Not compassion, calculating silence. The rope holder waits, counting heartbeats, pretending he can gauge how long until the line goes slack. 3 seconds, 5, 10. Water this cold knifes into the chest. Limbs seize faster than panic can swim. At 12 seconds, a few faces turn away. At 15, the rope jerks, and she breaks the surface like a drowned starfish. Retching pond water, hair plastered, teeth chattering a Morse code of shock. The onlookers cheer this, too. God saved her, she's innocent. Never mind the bruises, the lungs half full of muck, the trauma marinating in her bloodstream. She's cleared, technically. Practically, she's got a pneumonia invitation and a social credit score of 0, because suspicion doesn't wash off as easily as algae. Let's pause here and pop the Hollywood bubble. Dunkings weren't universal in medieval Europe. They peaked in certain pockets, Germanic states, parts of England, while places like Spain, ironically hosting the Inquisition, preferred other horrors. But the narrative of cold water justice spread fast, bolstered by pamphlets that sold better than hotcakes because nothing moves print like moral panic. Clergy argued over its legitimacy. Some bishops called it pagan nonsense, others blessed the ropes personally. Law codes shifted like sand. One year ordeal was sacred, the next year it was forbidden, then revived when a magistrate needed a quick show trial to quiet restless peasants. Speaking of shows, dunkings were theater, with expensive tickets paid in human dignity. Vendors circled with roasted nuts, kids splashed in safer shallows, and ballads sprouted within days. Tragic if she died, cautionary if she lived. Local economies even benefited. Inns hosted travelers keen to witness God's work. One chronicler complained that alehouses made more off witch days than harvest festivals, which is the medieval version of saying tragedy kills on TikTok. Now, about the accused. 9 times out of 10, she was poor. Poverty made you visible in the worst way. Unwashed, unprotected by patronage, and forced to haggle loud enough at market that someone inevitably branded you quarrelsome. Age factored in too. Elderly women accrued decades of grudges. A sharp tongue at 50 became malefic tongue at 60. Widowhood, even riskier. No husband meant no legal shield, and lone women were scary because they answered to nobody but themselves, a radical concept that had to be crushed under soggy rope and scripture quotes. Gender wasn't a hard rule. A handful of men took the plunge, especially healers whose herb lore threatened licensed physicians. But the cultural wiring targeted women. Eve, temptress, origin of sin. Why not cherry-pick theology to justify dunking Granny for hexing your sheep? Misogyny found water an excellent megaphone. The psychology of the crowd deserves a grim spotlight. Watching someone fight for breath flicked primal switches. Fear, dominance, relief that it's not me. Social scientists, the modern kind, armed with clipboards instead of halberds, call it identification by exclusion. You bond with the group by excluding the other. In a world rattled by famine, plague, war, accusing a neighbor felt like building a firewall against chaos. Dunking wasn't just about the accused. It was about the village saying to God, "See, we're rooting out evil. Spare our crops." Let's zoom in to a single bystander, Matilda, the baker's wife. She's clutching her shawl, frowning, maybe whispering a prayer. 2 nights ago, her dough wouldn't rise. She blamed damp weather, but a worm of doubt wriggled when she remembered the accused glancing at her cart. Now, as the woman resurfaces coughing, Matilda's doubt morphs first into vindication. "I knew it!" And then, oddly, into guilt when she sees the raw terror on that face. She'll carry that image for years, maybe dream of cold ponds. Yet tomorrow, if a new suspect is named, Matilda might watch again. Fear is a habit, and Dunking's fed it like bread feeds a fire. Medical fallout? Let's get clinical. Prolonged immersion in cold water can trigger ventricular fibrillation, heart chaos even healthy athletes can't defeat. Add rope compression cutting into arteries, plus the shock of being yanked by the chest, and you've got a recipe for internal bleeding, rib fractures, and secondary drowning hours later as water in the lungs wreaks slow havoc. Survivors weren't exactly staging comeback tours. They were coughing blood and shivering under lice-ridden blankets while a constable outside debated whether to rearrest them for further inquiry. Yet the myth endures. Modern pop culture loves a ducking scene. Cinematic villagers with torches, the accused screaming vows of innocence until bubbles replace syllables. What we rarely see is the aftermath. No one shows the survivor 3 days later, bones aching, ostracized, children throwing stones at her door. Nor do we see the alternate ending, where her body drifts to shore at dawn and the village elder sighs, "Pity," before leading morning prayers like nothing happened. Horror isn't the splash, it's the shrug afterward. A quick sidebar on terminology. Witch trial dunking is often lumped with swimming a witch, but swimming implies some agency. They swam her, the old phrase goes, which sounds almost quaint until you picture the thrashing. Language softens barbarity. We say ordeal instead of state-sanctioned near drowning, heretic instead of person with unpopular opinion, spectators instead of accomplices by inertia. Words are as slippery as pond algae, friends. Let's lighten the gloom, briefly, with the bizarre economics of dunking. Ropes had to be replaced when they frayed. Local tanners supplied them at a markup, calling it holy cord. Some ponds got dredged before big trials to remove debris. Safety measure or just making room for more bodies, you decide. Municipal budgets reflect line items like repairs to ducking stool, sandwiched between mending stocks and ale for the watchman. Bureaucracy meet brutality. Please sign here for next quarter's drowning allocation. Now zoom back out. In colonial North America, swimming tests popped up, though Puritan courts preferred spectral evidence, dream testimonies, visions, the courtroom equivalent of "my vibe says guilty." But when water ordeals did occur, the Atlantic chill rivaled any German mill pond. Imagine December in Massachusetts, ice forming on the rope as it slides through frozen fingers. The accused jerked into a slurry of slush so cold it burns hotter than fire. Why did communities cling to such madness? Because certainty is addictive. In a pre-germ theory world where crop blight, plague, and stillborn lambs had no clear cause, blaming a human offered narrative closure.
Dunking was a ritual that turned random misfortune into a solvable crime scene, with God cast as chief witness. Never mind that the verdict arrived soaked and shivering. Closure splashes louder than logic. There were, rarely, pockets of resistance. A mayor here, a magistrate there, refusing to authorize water ordeals, citing Roman law or plain common sense. They were accused of laxity, sometimes of secret heresy, because skepticism is threatening when your social order is built on communal paranoia. Still, those micro acts of courage chipped away at the practice until scientific revolution and centralized legal codes finally pulled the plug.
But let's not congratulate ourselves too quickly. Swap ponds for tabloids, ropes for hashtags, and you'll find modern society still excels at public dunkings, just figurative ones. We freeze reputations in an instant, declare guilt by viral clip, then move on when the next scandal surfaces. The water's digital now, but it's no warmer. Back to our pond one last time. The constables loosen the ropes. The woman collapses on muddy reeds, coughing like her lungs are made of glass. A priest steps forward, mutters absolution, perhaps shocked she's still breathing. Villagers disperse, half relieved, half disappointed there wasn't more blood. The fireflies return to the reeds. Somewhere a dog barks at nothing. The moon slides behind a cloud, and the pond, unbothered, resumes reflecting stars that know nothing of human cruelty. Smoke still hangs over the pond like a second dirt-smudged sky, but the village doesn't sleep. It buzzes, thinly, tensely, behind shuttered windows where candle stubs gutter beside bowls of soup gone cold because nobody can quite swallow after watching a neighbor kiss death and surface again. Inside those cramped timber frames, talk slithers from room to room. How long was she under? Did you see the way she floated first before the rope jerked? Someone claims they smelled brimstone the moment her hair hit the water. Someone else says they felt the pond churn, as if churns matter when terror is doing the stirring. Fear, once shared in daylight, ferments overnight into something thicker, anxious sludge, ready to fuel tomorrow's gossip mill. And tomorrow is exactly when the magistrate plans phase 2, because one dip rarely satisfies the beast they call justice. They will call it examination, but let's name the thing outright. Interrogation engineered to exhume a confession whether it exists or not. The accused, still coughing water, will be hauled from her straw pallet at dawn and marched to the tithe barn, a drafty structure that smells like wheat and rat droppings. The official rationale? She floated. Ergo, further proof must be extracted. If she'd sunk, she'd still be here. Remember, innocence buys you pneumonia, not freedom. Either way, the barn awaits. Picture the space. Beams blackened by decades of smoke. Ceilings so high the echoes arrive late like reluctant witnesses. Sunlight slants through gaps in the planks, slicing the dusty air into columns that look almost holy until you notice the whip hooks bolted overhead. Three-legged stool at center, bucket of well water sweats beside it. Rope coils glisten with tallow so they'll slide across skin without snagging. Friction slows the process, and the magistrate abhors delays. A scribe, thin as a bowstring, sits ready with quills, sand shaker, and the kind of blank stare that says he's turned off whatever part of himself registers empathy. He'll need that numbness. Words set to parchment here will soon weigh heavier than any millstone. Our accused is forced onto the stool. Her ankles wobble, nerves or hypothermia, impossible to tell.
Questions begin. They're gentle first. Faux concern wrapped in Latin phrases. Confiteor filia? Confess, daughter? She says nothing coherent, only the hoarse rattle of someone whose lungs still think they're underwater. Silence irritates the interrogators. Silence is room for doubt. So they reach for the next tool in the kit, pricking. Enter the witch-finder's needle, essentially a slim bodkin with a retractable shaft. When pressed against flesh, it appears to sink without drawing blood, a carnival trick masquerading as science. They prod her arms, her thighs, searching for the devil's mark, that mythical numb spot where Satan supposedly kissed allegiance onto skin. Each time the blade disappears, she gasps, more from shock than pain. But the observers nod sagely. Numbness. Evidence. Of course, the needle retracts on healthy skin too, but self-scamming is the magistrate's hidden specialty.
Hours drip by. She's asked to name accomplices. A neighbor's goat gives sour milk, surely a hex. Who taught her the charm of knots? Which demon rides the storm clouds at night? Every non-answer is logged as defiance. Eventually, they haul out the torture light menu allowed by regional statute. No racks here, not yet, just the strapado. Her wrists are bound before her, and a rope hoists her until toes barely skim dirt, shoulder sockets squealing louder than she dares. 5 minutes pass. Sweat beads despite the cold. She sags, vomiting pond water onto her chemise. The marshal lowers her, offers the water bucket not to drink, but to mirror her reflection. Look into your sin, he intones, as if guilt lives in cheekbones. She sees nothing but a stranger swollen with terror.
Somewhere outside, church bells toll tierce. Mid-morning, but her perception feels unstuck, minutes pooling into eddies. Children who last night watched the dunking skitter past the barn, daring each other to peek through knotholes. They catch a glimpse of her dangling and run home squealing, half horror, half exhilaration. Trauma becomes playground currency. By dusk, every household will have a fresh rumor. She levitated. She spewed green bile. She spoke Latin backward. Truth drowns fast in a river of children's chattering. Inside, the magistrate decides to escalate. They drag in the chair, not electric, obviously, but iron, perforated so coals beneath can roast skin gradually. Local law bars actual branding unless a second magistrate signs off, so they heat it just enough to feel like sitting atop a forge's breath. Our prisoner is deposited there. Sizzle of damp linen announces the pain before her scream does. Still, no confession. Pain alone doesn't always break spirit. It often distills it into desperate clarity. She blurts, between sobs, that she only knows prayers, not potions. That she nursed a feverish infant last winter. Maybe that's where gossip began. The scribe jerks his quill. Nursed infants, suspected for consuming life force. Words morph, like water freezing into whatever shape the bucket dictates.
Let's zoom out. Why this obsession with confession? Medieval jurisprudence treated it as the gold standard. Guilt spoken by the guilty. Self-conviction. Torturing until you said the words wasn't seen as contaminating evidence. It was extracting hidden truth, like mining ore. Theologians debated how much agony constituted coercion. Some argued that confession under excessive pain was invalid. But define excessive. 3 turns of the strapado or 5? Human backs possess more vertebrae than legal texts have clarity.
A brief digression on manuals.
The Malleus Maleficarum, panned 1486, became the pseudo-academic Bible of witch hunters. It recommended water ordeals sparingly, preferring testimony plus bodily signs. But local courts cherry-picked what suited them. Earlier Carolingian capitularies technically forbade ordeal by cold water, yet regional judges revived it whenever panic peaked. Law was less a shield than a cloak, tossed over brutality to lend it shape. Back to our barn. Evening slides in. Torches replace daylight, gilding every sweat bead and tear track. The magistrate, frustrated, orders her returned to the cell. She collapses, half carried by guards. Straw pokes torn flesh, but exhaustion overrides agony. In fever dreams, she hears water lapping, imagines herself forever suspended between sink and float, a ghost buoyed by rumors. Meanwhile, the scribe trims his quill and drafts tomorrow's warrant, a second dunking to confirm findings. Confirmation bias with a literal splash. While she shivers, village elders convene at the tavern's back room. Oak tables scarred by tankards, candles pooling wax like soldiers fallen in formation. They discuss logistics. The pond bank's muddy. New stakes may be driven for better leverage. A merchant offers rope at discount. He'll recoup in ale sales from the crowd. Someone suggests blessing the water beforehand. Symbolism matters for morale. The sexton volunteers holy salt. Plans solidify faster than mercy evaporates. Elsewhere, a different drama brews. A miller's wife, Martha, quietly wraps bread and dried apples. By lantern glow she creeps to the lockup, bribes a sleepy guard with a promise of grain come harvest, and slips food through the grate. Acts of compassion, though tiny, seed cracks in monolithic cruelty. Martha risks accusation herself. Aid to a witch is often read as complicity, but she's driven by memory. Last winter, the accused brought herbs that eased Martha's childbirth pains. Gratitude outmuscles fear, at least for one night. Morning of the second dunking. Word spreads like spilled ink. Farmers postpone fieldwork. Artisans close shops. A traveling minstrel sets up near the green, tuning lute strings. The spectacle is good for tip cups. Children rehearse chants they half remember from previous trials. The pond, churned by yesterday's frenzy, looks uglier now. Scum flecks the surface. Reeds lean like eavesdroppers. Our accused is dragged out again, face gray as dawn fog. The crowd parts reluctantly. Nobody wants splinters from her shackles touching their cloaks. This time, the clergy are present in force, 3 monks and a parish priest clutching a silver aspergillum. They chant psalms, sprinkling water on water as if redundancy amplifies holiness. One monk reads aloud from Matthew. The axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Not exactly aquatic, but the tone says what Scripture doesn't. Cut her down if she's rotten. Bindings. Same hog tie, new rope. But the magistrate adds a twist. Stone weight strapped to her waist. The logic does somersaults. If she's truly innocent, saints will counterweigh sin. If she's not, the stone speeds her to confession or to heaven's tribunal, whichever arrives first. No lifeline rope this round, just a pike pole to snag her if they feel generous. Generosity is fickle in public rituals. Too much mercy and the audience jeers. Too little and they gasp. The operator must read the mob's mood like a bard tunes a melody. She's hoisted to the verge. Heartbeats thunder in her ears louder than the priest's chants.
Some accounts say washed-out victims felt a surreal calm the instant before submersion, a freeze of fear so total it flipped into numbness. Whether myth or biochemistry, our subject feels only the ache of rope biting wrists. Then gravity claims her. Water erupts around like shattered mirrors. No float this time. The stone yanks her straight down, sediment puffing like smoke. Cold clamps her chest. She tries kicking, but ankles are fettered. Light dims. Sound warps into dull booms. Cheers? Gasps? She can't tell. Panic claws. Mouth opens. Pond surges in. Reflex convulses. Her lungs burn. Images flash. The sick infant she once nursed. Martha's secret apple. Yesterday's sky. Survival instinct screams, but muscles fail. Limbs heavy, she drifts, an effigy underwater. Above, seconds pass, too many. The pike operator hesitates. Crowd leans forward, torn between thirst for spectacle and squeamishness. At maybe 20 seconds, nobody times precisely, he plunges the pole, hooks the rope loop under her bound arms, hauls with help. She surfaces limp, face bluish. Scribe notes, sank, thus innocent, yet no pulse discernible. Magistrate frowns. Dead martyrs complicate paperwork. They lay her on the bank, attempt chest compressions, rudimentary, pushing on sternum more out of superstition than anatomy. Water dribbles, no breath. The priest pronounces her soul commended. Crowd murmurs, uncertain. They came for verdict, got corpse. Some shuffle away guiltily. Others insist the devil escaped before justice landed. The magistrate declares case closed, instructs gravediggers to inter her beyond consecrated ground. Ironic for an innocent, but blame must rest somewhere. In the days that follow, the village fractures along hairline cracks. Martha weeps openly at market, calls the trial murder. A blacksmith counters, better her than the lot of us cursed. The innkeeper tallies profits, counting fear-stained coins. Children chase each other around the pond, reenacting the dunking with sticks and shrieks, normalizing horror through play. Gravediggers whisper that the corpse showed finger marks around the neck. Were they made by the rope or the devil exiting? Superstition thrives in unanswered questions. Legal machinery churns elsewhere. A circuit judge hears of the death and quietly rebukes the magistrate for bypassing the 1215 ban on ordeal. The magistrate drafts a defense citing local emergency. Bureaucrats shuffle parchments. Nothing changes for the next suspect named. The system moves not by gears of justice, but by inertia of fear. Zoom centuries ahead, just for perspective. Modern historians comb parish ledgers, stumble on this very case. Name smudged, verdict perished. They log it into databases, tallying witch hunt fatalities, adding one more bead to a grim rosary of thousands. Numbers cannot resurrect voice. Archives feel like morgues where facts lie under white sheets. Yet each rediscovered name pushes back against forgetting, whispering through footnotes. I was more than a statistic. I had favorites. Songs, seasons, maybe a secret crush on the Cooper's Apprentice. Academic monographs can't catch that, but memory tries. Back to our timeline. Burial night. Drizzle patters shallow grave soil. Martha, reckless in mourning, sneaks to lay a posy of late daisies. Meager blossoms hardy enough to bloom after frost. She whispers an apology she shouldn't owe, fearing hoofbeats of patrol. None come. Stars hide. The pond lies still.
but villagers swear mist rising off it forms a woman's silhouette. Tales ignite. Her spirit roams, seeking justice. Ironically, that rumor makes parents keep children indoors at dusk, having petty thefts and tavern brawls. Even in death, she polices the village better than the constable ever did.
Months pass. A brutal winter starves livestock. Someone blames Martha's midnight flowers for angering God. Whisper Chain targets her. She finds a wax doll on her doorstep, pins stuck where a heart might be. She remembers the pond, remembers the rope, and decides no. Packing spare bread and husband's savings, she flees before dawn, footprints filling with new snow. Flight equals guilt in communal logic. By sunset, Martha is the next name on the magistrate's suspect list, an absence shaped like treason.
Pause. See the cycle? Uncertainty breeds accusation. Accusation breeds spectacle. Spectacle leaves vacuum. Vacuum demands a new villain. Witch trial dunkings weren't isolated thunderclaps. They were storms looping across decades, feeding off social low pressure. War, famine, plague, political upheaval. Wherever misery concentrated, so did the urge to purge it through bodies bound and submerged. Medical minds of the era occasionally protested. A few university-trained physicians wrote tracts arguing that floating depended on corporeal fattiness, and that cold water shock could kill blameless souls. But science spoke Latin. Villagers spoke fear. Guess which tongue the magistrates found more persuasive when the harvest failed? Let's dive into law again. Brief, I promise. By the mid-1600s, English courts leaned on the Witchcraft Acts, which didn't explicitly prescribe dunking, but allowed searching and watching. Witchfinders like Matthew Hopkins, self-styled Witchfinder General, exploited that gray zone, reviving swimming tests to goose confessions. Hopkins' reign, 1644–47, drowned more reputations than bodies, but his manual spread the practice anew. Parliament eventually executed Hopkins' ally, John Stern, for cruelty, a rare backlash that signaled tides turning. Legal scholars cited miscarriages of justice, empirical insufficiency, and the plain cruelty of it all. Slowly, the pond lost its power. But not before Atlantic export. Colonists carried the ritual to New England, where icy rivers served as stage. 1692, Salem rarely used dunking. Spectral evidence reigned. But nearby Connecticut dunked suspected witches decades earlier. Records from Hartford, 1662, describe Mary Barnes swimming like a lodge, whatever that means, followed by her execution. Cold water traveled well. Hysteria needs little packing space. Fast forward to the Age of Reason. Montesquieu and Voltaire lampoon ordeal, calling it barbaric relic. Even church hierarchies concede that divine judgment probably doesn't calibrate buoyancy. By 1780s, British common law treats dunking as assault. Yet folk memory lingers, warping into county fair reenactments, mock duckings of shrews for laughs. A violent ritual diluted into slapstick, but still echoing old misogyny. The stool is now a carnival ride, but the point remains: embarrass the mouthy woman until she shuts up. So where does that leave us? At a muddy shoreline between superstition and law, ethics and entertainment, yesterday's pond and today's social media feed. We may have drained the literal water, but our appetite for public submersion, of reputations instead of bodies, hasn't dried up. We scroll, we judge, we dunk with hashtags, convinced buoyancy equals guilt. Yet, glimmers of progress exist. Modern restorative justice seeks truth without torture. Psychological studies reveal how crowds lose empathy, prompting new training for law enforcement. Museums host exhibits honoring witch trial victims, turning statistics back into people. Some villages install memorial stones near former ponds, ripples carved into granite, names etched so rain fills each letter, like tears the victims never shed in safety.
And here, dear listeners, bathed in the glow of screens instead of torchlight, is the invitation. Remember the pond, not as trivia, but as mirror. When rumors tempt, when fear wants a scapegoat, recall cold water over bound wrists and ask, are we about to dunk someone because it feels easier than facing randomness? History's lesson is chilly but clear. Panic plus procedure equals tragedy with paperwork.
Ash settles softly on the magistrate's empty chair, as though the wood itself is sighing after yesterday's spectacle. But another figure is already on the road, boots thudding through spring mud while ravens trace lazy spirals overhead. His name, at least the one he advertises, is Elias Crowder, Eternitant Searcher of Witches, Examiner of Malefice, or, when tavern tongues grow bold, the floating noose in human form. He moves from shire to shire the way storms do, sudden, profitable, and rarely welcome twice. In the little satchel clinking at his hip rest brass pricking needles, a twist of waxed thread for puppeting confessions, 3 miniature parchment manuals quoting equal parts scripture and pseudoscience, and a careful ledger of fees. Crowder is what happens when fear becomes a freelance industry. He enters villages the way a carnival does, preceded by rumor, inflated by anxiety. Only instead of jugglers, his entourage is paperwork and a scent of tallow candles burnt too low. He promises clarity where chaos reigns, justice where graves still steam. His pitch is polished. A brief sermon on the contagiousness of witchcraft, a wink to local magistrates about keeping your hands clean, and finally an itemized bill. 1 shilling per suspect examined, 2 for every confession, plus traveling costs and the right to reuse confiscated household goods to offset expenses. In famine years, the goods outweigh the coins. But bread ovens, spinning wheels, and goat pens convert easily to silver when you know the correct middlemen. Crowder knows them all. Our pond-scarred village is next on his circuit, and its elders, still jittery from the fatal dunking, convince themselves professional help will restore order. Crowder is invited to Sunday supper in the guild hall. He arrives late so anticipation can mature like cheese left too close to the hearth. He eats sparingly. Hunger diminishes the voice's edge, and he plans a razor speech, then stands, wiping grease from his beard with measured disdain. He speaks not of devils, but of economics. Curses stunt crops, tarnish coin, slow trade. Witches are a blight on markets, he says. Therefore, rooting them out is patriotic. Heads nod because patriotism always sells. He asks to see the pond. Lanterns bob across grass slick with dew. He inspects the bank like a mason appraising stone quality. Too shallow, too many reeds, easy for bodies to snag and float. Better, he advises, to carve a channel, deepen the middle, install a wooden scaffolding with pulleys so suspects may be dipped repeatedly without risk of accidental death. Can't secure a confession from a corpse, he shrugs. The work will cost, but villagers rationalize. Infrastructure investment, like fixing a mill race. Committees form before dawn.
Meanwhile, the previous magistrate retreats into drink, haunted by the blue-gray face of the woman he drowned. Crowder marks that weakness like a wolf scenting a limp. By midweek, he has maneuvered himself into de facto judicial authority. Parchment credentials stamped in another county are waived as proof. The scribe, never one to resist power's perfume, swears loyalty for a modest raise. Round 2 of witch hunting is ready to spool.
But let's rewind a moment. Where did men like Crowder emerge from, and why did communities embrace them even after disasters like the pond death? The answer is part theology, part economics, and part theater. After Europe's 30 Years' War, swaths of countryside lay razed, disease-ridden, and leaderless. Secular courts were understaffed, church courts overwhelmed. Into that gap rode freelancers carrying pocket-sized demonologies. They weren't entirely self-invented. Royal edicts occasionally authorized commissions to sweep trouble zones. And like tax farmers, witch-finders often operated on percentage of take. Property seized from the condemned was split among hunter, court, and crown. It turned superstition into a revenue stream and suspicion into currency. Crowder's toolkit illustrates the assembly line nature of his craft. The brass needle retracts to prove numb devil's marks. A second, non-retracting needle can reopen suspicious scars later, supporting tales of midnight covenants. He keeps iron bridle bits, gags designed to prevent imps or familiars from slipping through a suspect's lips as invisible flies. He carries lengths of hemp pre-measured so noose knots fall precisely between vertebrae. A respectable trade needs standardized equipment. And perhaps most chilling, he totes wax tablets etched with confession templates, blank spaces awaiting names, dates, accomplice lists. Fill in the heresy, just add terror. The village carpenter, pressed into service, saws beams for the new dunking scaffold. Children perch on fences watching wood chips fly like snow. They nick the curls to braid into lucky bracelets. Violence has a way of dripping into play until it feels normal as nursery rhyme. The carpenter mutters that lumber would serve better repairing barns storm-damaged last month, but no one listens. Fear chooses its own priorities. Crowder's first quarry is, predictably, Martha's husband, Jonas, left behind when she fled. Flight equals guilt, Crowder announces at the tavern, so more ears than necessary hear it. Jonas is cooperative at first, believing innocence self-evident. Crowder offers him the voluntary swim option. Submit to dunking, clear your name, bring your wife back from disgrace. Jonas hesitates. Everyone has seen what can go wrong. That hesitation is catalogued as reluctance, which Crowder equates with complicity. Within an hour, Jonas is shackled in the church porch, awaiting dawn demonstration. But the carpenter's beams aren't ready, so the old pond bank will host one more show. Dawn's light sees Jonas stripped to shirt and breeches, rope binding wrists to ankles. Same package as the woman before, minus the stone weight for now. Crowder adds flair. He sprinkles iron filings into the water, claiming iron repels witchcraft. If Jonas is truly innocent, the filings will drift away from him. The filings are nearly weightless. Wind pushes them across the surface whatever happens below. But onlookers don't study physics. Jonas sinks immediately, no float, dead weight. Crowder's deputies haul him out fast. They need him alive to question about Martha's whereabouts. He's coughing too hard to speak, so they sit him on a crate, wrap him in a rough blanket, and begin interrogation anyway. Questions come like hailstones.
Who else attended Martha's secret herb gatherings? Did your wife keep poppets? Why did she flee unless warned by another witch? Jonas denies, sobbing. Crowder nods sympathetically. Classic sign, he explains, the devil's snot, weeping to mimic repentance. The crowd, primed by rhetoric, murmurs agreement. By noon, Jonas has confessed to nothing, but Crowder doesn't need consent to escalate. He needs only the mob's momentum. He invokes watching next. Suspects are kept awake for 48 hours under bright candles, any twitch interpreted as a familiar manifesting. Jonas is chained upright in a stall normally housing oxen. Villagers take shifts observing. Some bring ale, turning surveillance into a convivial vigil. Sleep deprivation warps Jonas's sense of time. He begins hallucinating flickers in the lamplight, and when he flinches, watchers shout, "There, a spirit!" Crowder arrives, records the twitch as evidence, and, not inconsequentially, bills the parish for extra lamp oil.
While Jonas unravels, Crowder dispatches 2 riders to neighboring towns with printed broadsides. Witchcraft unmasked, public demonstration this Saint's Day. Half showmanship, half marketing. More spectators equal more purses to tax. He plans for the scaffold's grand debut to coincide with Jonas's expected confession. But confessions, like crops, aren't always ready for harvest. Jonas clings to sanity, muttering prayers. Crowder improvises. If the husband won't break, perhaps the pond remembers where Martha fled. He organizes a water scrying. Drops of Jonas's blood dribbled on the pond surface. Ripples, being indiscriminate, radiate in all directions. But Crowder points to the largest wavelet, south, toward the old Roman road. Riders peel off that way, ready to ransack cottages for the fugitive. Pause the unfolding cruelty to examine the economics again. Each rider draws a per diem. Each confiscated blanket from a searched hut is security. Crowder's ledger fattens. The pond, once common grazing land, now hosts a fee-collecting spectacle. Villagers pay indirectly, labor diverted, fields untended, and the subtle tax of fear itself, which drains community trust faster than any levy. Down the Roman road, Martha has found refuge in a tumbled croft with a widow named Elspeth, herself once accused in another parish, but cleared when a real thief confessed. Elspeth hides Martha under floorboards when the search party gallops by, hearts hammering in sync with hoofbeats overhead. Here, the illusion of safety fractures. Persecution has a long memory and longer arms. Elspeth teaches Martha a vital skill: silence inside panic. They wait until darkness before slipping into beech woods, heading deeper than any pursuit will bother. Survival strategies blossom in the margins like mushrooms, quiet, deliberate, feeding on decay. Back in the village, Jonas's 48th hour arrives. He slumps, eyelids fluttering. Crowder stages the final push, a display of searching before the congregation. 2 midwives, coerced, must examine Jonas's body for devil's marks. They feel awkward. Protocol usually reserves such searches for female suspects, but Crowder insists equality of suspicion. In a cruel joke, he chooses the scar where Jonas's childhood dog bit him. Presses the retractable needle, no bleeding. The crowd gasps. Jonas, delirious, begins reciting Psalm 51. Crowder interrupts. "Confession will save your soul, man." A tremor runs through Jonas's shoulders. He breaks. Names spill, nonsense fragments. A baker once sold day-old bread. A shepherd whom Martha waved to across pasture. even the carpenter who built the scaffold. Crowder transcribes greedily. More suspects mean more trials, more income, a self-propelling wheel. Let's not breeze past Jonas's psychological collapse. Modern psychiatrists label it coerced compliant confession, the mind choosing short-term relief over long-term consequence when torture looms. Jonas believes naming others might shorten his ordeal, or at least distribute blame so he's not alone. What he doesn't realize is that witch hunts treat every confession as open door to new accusations. Each name is a fuse. Crowder lights them one by one. Soon the arrest tally reaches 10. The barn and the church crypt double as makeshift jails. The carpenter's scaffold is finished. 2 upright posts, crossbeam, crank handle, and a wicker cradle to lower suspects into water, then raise them swiftly. Villagers who earlier questioned the morality now admire the craftsmanship. Humans have an unsettling knack for praising the elegance of devices designed for suffering. The inaugural mass dunking is set for Lammas Day. Crowder choreographs it like theater. A platform for town elders provides VIP viewing. Minstrels hired by the innkeeper strum minor chords to heighten tension. The accused, in shift dresses or linen shirts, are paraded from barn to bank, each preceded by a herald announcing alleged crimes. One, a baker's apprentice, supposedly made bread rise too quickly. Obvious black art. Another, the carpenter himself, allegedly carved secret sigils into beams. The silliness of charges doesn't dilute their danger. Absurdity is the yeast that makes hysteria rise. As the crank squeals and bodies dip, something novel happens. One suspect, old Aunt Sybil, surfaces laughing. Not manic, but mirthful, a watery cackle echoing off the hillside. The crowd, unsettled, hushes. Sybil declares, "If I be a witch, may the pond turn to ale." Of course, nothing happens, except ripples, but the laugh lodges splinters of doubt into a dozen minds. Humor, brief as a candle flicker, reminds them humanity persists beneath the labels the court slaps on. Crowder senses danger in levity. He orders Sybil gagged and re-dipped. The second submersion is prolonged. She surfaces silent, spit mixed with pond algae. Laughter drowned, order restored. Jonas is last. He's too weak to stand, so guards drag him like wet laundry. The crowd expects drama. Will he float? But Crowder waves them off. No need. He has confessed. Instead, they bind him to a cart destined for county jail. Formal hanging will follow after Crown review, a slower process that escapes immediate bloodlust, but ensures a paper trail the government can claim as due process. Crowder calculates that a well-documented execution draws higher fees. He pockets his ledger, already eyeing villages eastward. Night after the spectacle, torchlight dances on tavern rafters while coins clink like hail on roof tiles. The innkeeper pours cider for patrons recounting the day with boast or dread. Crowder, seated in corner shadow, flips ledger pages, totaling revenue. He allows himself a single cup. Drunkenness dulls instinct, and he survives by sharpness. Overhead, thunder rumbles, summer storm. Rain soon drums the thatch, and faces around hearth relax. Precipitation cleanses moral grime, they pretend. But rain brings more than washing. The swollen pond overflows, undermining the new scaffold's posts. By dawn, one upright has toppled, clutch tilted like a hanged man still swinging. Superstitious whispers spark, the drowned woman's ghost,
Sybil's unfinished curse, God's displeasure. Repair costs loom, and Crowder has moved on, taking his expertise with him. The village must pick between spending scarce coin to fix a fear machine or letting dread subside. The carpenter, released for now because jail wagons were full, argues that fields need plowing more than ponds need deepening. Elders grumble, but the world has a stubborn way of forcing priorities. Harvest won't wait for hysteria.
Meanwhile, on the dirt road bordered by heather, Crowder's horse plods toward the next hamlet. He rehearses a fresh sermon about iron filings, adds Jonas's confession to his portfolio, and dreams of becoming advisor to a magistrate in a larger market town, where gallows cast longer shadows and purses hang heavier. Witch-finding, like any enterprise, scales.
Zoom outward again, macro lens. Across Europe, the peak fury is already cresting. Pamphleteers question the legality of trials based on spectral evidence. Scholars translate Reginald Scott's discovery of witchcraft into vernacular tongues, sowing skepticism among literate gentry. In England, the Enlightenment's first embers glow, whispering about natural laws and human rights. But those sparks take decades to catch. In outlying parishes, ponds still claim bodies.
Eventually, Parliament's 1736 Witchcraft Act reclassifies witchcraft as fraudulent pretense rather than capital felony. Crowder, should he live that long, will pivot, perhaps styling himself an exposer of con artists instead of conjurers. Grifters mutate faster than laws. Yet the memory of cold water justice survives another century in folk songs and cautionary tales. Only when industrialization drags peasants to mills and factories do communal ponds lose centrality, and with them convenient stages for drownings disguised as trials.
What became of Martha and Elspeth? Oral tradition, half legend, half wishful thinking, says they crossed the channel disguised as lace merchants, settled in the Low Countries where Calvinist courts scoffed at swimming tests. Records list 2 midwives in Rotterdam circa 1672 with similar names, fined once for practicing medicine without guild license, but otherwise unmolested. Perhaps they healed more children. Perhaps they told their own daughters to avoid ponds at night, not for fear of spirits, but of frantic men wielding ropes.
Back in our village, decades later, children catch frogs where scaffold timbers rotted into the mud. A stone slab stands near the willow trunk, inscription worn, "In memory of those tried by water, God knows his own." The ambiguity is intentional. Admitting error risks disturbing the fragile peace. Elders talk of the old witchfinder times like a bad winter, harsh, regrettable, but nature's will. They rarely mention the names that fed the ledger. And so the cold water era recedes, leaving ripples on jurisprudence still visible today. Miranda rights, the presumption of innocence, the outlawing of torture. Each tiny legal safeguard is a brick in a dam built to keep terror from flooding courts again. But dams require maintenance, vigilance, education, empathy. Because the urge to simplify uncertainty by flinging someone, anyone, into metaphorical water hasn't vanished. It simply finds new ponds. Media trials, comment section mobs, algorithmic outrage loops. The temperature may be digital, but the chill is familiar. We close tonight watching the pond's surface settle under moonlight. Bullfrogs croak, unconcerned by ghosts or history. Reeds sway. Somewhere a nightjar calls. In that stillness, you might imagine hearing the faint splash of a rope-weight bundle breaking water centuries ago. Listen closer. It could be a warning. Justice that relies on spectacle is always thirsty for another body. Best we keep our buckets of skepticism handy when the next crowd beckons. Lamp smoke curls against the low rafters of the London coffee house, turning candle flame into hazy halos while quills scratch like restless beetles across foolscap. Here, hundreds of miles from that muddy village pond, a different kind of current is gathering, one made of ink, argument, and the soft clink of porcelain saucers. It is 1664, plague yet a recent ache, Charles II back upon the throne, and every table in Garraway's pulses with rumor. Dutch war, comet sightings, and, quietly, doubts about the old ordeal of cold water. Doubt is dangerous, but in a city that survived fire, contagion, and a regicide's fallout, danger has begun to taste a little like progress. Two men bend together over a pamphlet still damp from the press. One wears the black cassock of a dissenting minister, the other a gray periwig powdered just enough to signal barrister. The pamphlet's title in bold Roman type reads, "A Modern Inquiry into the Practice of Ducking by an Observer of Both Law and Physic." Inside, paragraphs march in sober columns, listing cases where suspected witches sank, perished, and were afterwards found, by surgeons with newly sharpened scalpels, to carry water-clogged lungs like any drowned sailor, no devils saving them, no bubbles of demon breath. The pamphlet names counties, dates, and, most unsettling, the revenue collected from seized estates. Margins bristle with footnotes citing Sir Edward Coke's Institutes and the Corpus Juris. It is, in short, a hand grenade lobbed into custom. Across London Bridge, apprentice printers hawk the same tract for a penny a copy, shouting, "Read how the ducking fails!" Some buyers use it to wrap pies. Yet the idea seeps. Maybe floating or sinking has less to do with Satan and more to do with a person's clothing, lung capacity, or whether some enterprising witch-finder tied extra knots. Back we go to the village, late autumn now, hedges stitched with frost. News of the London pamphlet travels on coach wheels and peddler gossip. Arrives first in the vicar's letter bag, bulging with diocesan tuttises. He reads, frowns, and files it beside unpaid tithe lists. Reform is a city hobby, he mutters. Ponds are a country reality. Still, a seed drops, quiet, into the soil of his conscience. Crowder, meanwhile, crosses shires like a migrating crow, leaving behind a breadcrumb trail of disgruntled parishes and half-finished scaffolds. He has discovered the pamphlet, too, and it annoys him less for its moral stance than for its threat to his business model. Reputation is his currency, skepticism is inflation. So he drafts a rebuttal, an exposition against the seditious denial of devilish impostures, peppered with Latin, revelations, and anecdotal horrors. He sends copies to magistrates whose goodwill he still counts on, urging them to stand firm lest England fall to heresy and French fashions alike. But pamphlets breed like alley cats. Within months another broadside appears, Observations upon the Late Exposition, demonstrating the natural causes of buoyancy. This one, penned by an Oxford student enamored of Archimedes, includes cheeky woodcuts of egg-filled bladders and wooden mannequins wearing petticoats. It explains, with diagrams, how trapped air in linen shifts odds of floating. The illustration of a witch-finder surreptitiously pressing on a victim's shoulders while spectators squint is particularly scathing.
Coffee-house wits roar with laughter, and laughter, once it enters a debate, corrodes dogma like salt water on iron.
Let's slip from the city back to the countryside, where Jonas's trial at the county assizes nears. The jail stinks of straw, wet stone, and ills the physician calls jail fever. Jonas, thinner than a candle wick, has been allowed visits from a parish curate sympathetic to his plight. The curate brings news of the pamphlets, whispering through bars that times may be changing. Jonas stares, hollow-eyed. He barely believes in tomorrow, let alone reform. Yet on the day of arraignment, a solicitor, hired pro bono by a group of London merchants funding legal experiments, arrives with trimmed beard and a sheaf of depositions. He intends, astonishingly, to challenge the admissibility of a water ordeal in open court.
The courtroom, oak-paneled and draughty, fills with rustling capes and muffled coughs. At the front, the judge, a man who fought for Parliament, then bent knee to the restored king, polishes his spectacles. The indictment is read. Jonas, yeoman, did practice witchcraft in concert with Martha, his wife, now fugitive, bewitching cattle, spoiling bread, and murdering by malefice one Aunt Sybil, late of this parish, now deceased. Sybil did die, of pneumonia 2 weeks after her dunking, officially God's will. The prosecutor calls Crowder as expert witness. Crowder sweeps in, hat under arm, ledger in hand, voice draped in authority.
But the defense solicitor rises, cites coke. Trials by ordeal were abolished for felony after the Fourth Lateran Council and never formally reinstated by statute. Therefore, ducking cannot serve as proof. Gasps. The judge frowns. He knows his books, but also his politics. The solicitor then submits affidavits from 2 midwives coerced into pricking Jonas, and from the carpenter asserting he worked under threat. He even references the new pamphlet explaining buoyancy. Science enters the dock like a sudden draft. Crowder counters with tradition, with James I's demonology, with continental precedent. Yet for every rhetorical flourish he offers, the solicitor offers a corpse count. The jury, a dozen landholders tired of harvest failures, listens in uneasy silence. When deliberation comes, they find Jonas not guilty of murder, but still uneasy about suspicious practices. The judge, compromising, sentences him to banishment from the county rather than death. Crowder's face stiffens, and acquittal is bad for sales. Jonas staggers from jail, clutching a travel pass, bound for anywhere but home. The solicitor palms him a little money, a coachman a crust of bread. Freedom tastes bitter without Martha, but rumors place her in the Low Countries and ferries cross every week. Jonas turns east toward coast and hope. The verdict ripples outward. In the village tavern, some call it mercy. Others hiss betrayal of righteous fear. The scaffold rots faster now. No funds approved for repair. Children poke at it with sticks, pretending giants smashed it. Play, rewriting history again. Zoom wider. Scholars at Cambridge debate natural philosophy versus occult causes. Robert Boyle publishes experiments on air pressure. The Royal Society's meetings buzz about measurable phenomena. Witch dunking, once a staple of parish justice, begins to look like alchemy, old, theatrical, unrepeatable under laboratory conditions. Parliament notices the shift in mood. A backbench petition lands on the clerk's table suggesting formal inquiry into irregular trials.
Meanwhile, the medical profession flexes new muscles. In Edinburgh, Surgeon Major James Laurie performs autopsies on 3 drowned witches, documenting pulmonary edema identical to ordinary drownings. He circulates his findings via Latin theses. Graduates copy it to English marginalia. Midwives, emboldened by science's protective cloak, grow bolder in refusing to prick suspects. One writes, "We are not instruments of cruelty, but of birth." Small statement, large crack. Back yet again to Crowder. Business dwindling, he reinvents. He promotes spiritual hygiene seminars, offering to inspect households for cursed objects. Paid consultancy rather than prosecution. Ironically, he markets early psychological counseling. Unburden thy conscience and the devil shall flee. But towns prefer new entertainments, horse races, Italian puppeteers, gossip of plantations across the Atlantic. Fear's theater loses box office share. Still, not all embrace change. 1692, across the ocean, Salem ignites, proving old tinder can blaze elsewhere. English pamphleteers seize upon the fiasco. An ocean's distance underlines their argument. See, only colonies still cling to Dunking's cousin, spectral evidence. In 1695, Parliament finally drafts the Witchcraft Suppression Bill, tightening evidentiary standards. Lords debate into candle smoke dawns. Bishops warn of weakening moral fiber. Merchants mutter about trade disruption when widows' assets are seized unjustly. Economics again tips scales. The bill passes committee. Our village receives the news with bewildered shrugs. By now they rely on traveling quacks for amusement, not witch-finders. The pond hosts maypole dances. Its murderous past whispered only when mist floats low. The vicar, older, keeps the Reform Act pinned above his desk, penning sermons about charity over judgment. What of Martha? Letters smuggled across the narrow sea finally reach Jonas, now a porter in Ipswich docks. She writes in careful script, "I keep a herb stall in Rotterdam and assist a local surgeon with poultices. I am safe." Jonas sails on a packet boat one gusty March, reunited at last on a cobbled quay smelling of herring and tar. Exile curdles into expatriate life. They open a small apothecary, painting over the door Crowdery Herbs and Remedies. Naming it after their tormentor is their private joke, turning poison into poultice. Back home, the 1736 Act will reclassify witchcraft as pretended, finish draining the pond of legal power. But remnants linger. In provincial fairs, children bob for apples, echo of trial by water rendered harmless. Idioms survive too. Witch hunt for any frenzy, sink or swim for ruthless testing. Language carries history's sediment. Let's step one more layer outward, to us, 21st century listeners, earbuds warming under blankets, drifting toward sleep. Why linger on soggy trials and pamphlet wars? Because every generation inherits a pond, a place where anxiety demands a body to throw in. Today's pond might be social media, a job market, a polarized ballot box. The lesson carved by cold water is simple, chilling, and evergreen. When fear becomes procedural, injustice masquerades as policy. And it takes brave pamphleteers, meddling scientists, stubborn lawyers, and sometimes a cackling old sibyl to tilt the balance back toward reason. Across the Atlantic now thunderheads gather. Enlightenment collides with superstition again in new guises. Phrenology, eugenics, moral panics over novels corrupting youth. Each time, the apparatus resembles that wooden scaffold, freshly built, praised for preventive virtue, then abandoned when rotted by evidence. The story is cyclical but not cynical. The circle widens, includes more skeptics, fewer victims. Progress does not erase tragedy. It layers accountability over it like sediment sealing fossils. So, as the candle in our coffee house guttered low, those two readers folded the pamphlet, paid the girl with the tray, and stepped into fog. They could not know that their idle murmurs would echo into statutes, that their grandchildren would trust thermometers more than witch marks. Small acts, reading, doubting, matter. Tonight, let that be our lullaby. Skepticism as quiet heroism. Ponds frozen not by winter, but by awareness. When next someone offers a simple dunk to solve a complex worry, remember Jonas's bruises, Martha's flight, Sybil's drowned laughter, and ask for the pamphlet, the data, the peer review. The devil, if he exists, surely fears questions more than cold water. Chill dawn mist clings to the Thames as a mail coach rattles over Westminster Bridge, its wheels spattering dew onto the boots of a yawning watchman. Inside the House of Lords, candles splutter in silver sconces, while clerks shuffle parchment like weary magpies arranging straw. It is February 1736, and the chamber smells of tallow, gout liniment, and quiet revolution. On the oak table lies a slim bill, 9 neat clauses, whose purpose is nothing less than to drown an old superstition in legal ink. No trumpet fanfare, no royal astrologer reading portents, just legislators in periwigs debating whether England still needs the devil on its statute books. Outside, London carries on. Fishmongers bawl, chimney sweeps whistle, and nobody notices Parliament performing an exorcism on the nation's laws. The Witchcraft Act of 1736 does something deceptively subtle. It does not proclaim, amid thunderclaps, that sorcery is impossible. Instead, it calmly reclassifies every hex, charm, and midnight pact as pretended rather than real, making the true crime one of fraud. Conjure demons if you like, says the new statute with sly Enlightenment irony, just don't charge the neighbors for it. The maximum penalty becomes a year in jail and a stint in the pillory, the same treatment meted out to quacks who sell miracle elixirs. By redefining witchcraft as bunk rather than blasphemy, the law pulls the pitchfork teeth from mob justice. If magic is merely deception, then ducking is no more rational than dunking a street juggler for juggling poorly. Yet, legislation alone doesn't melt centuries of fear. 3 counties north, a copy of the act arrives folded inside a coachman's gazette. The squire reads it over breakfast, mutters, "Progress, confound it," and goes back to complaining about turnpike tolls. In village alehouses, where evenings still crackle with stories of phantom hounds, the news barely ripples the beer foam. Superstition is not a weed you yank once. It's bindweed curling through communal memory. One act of Parliament may trim the stock, but rhizomes run deep. Exhibit A, Hertfordshire, March 1712, 24 years before the act, yet already feeling the tremors of change. In the hamlet of Walkern, Jane Wenham, an elderly midwife with a penchant for muttering Latin prayers, finds herself accused of bewitching livestock and making a farmhand fly. He later admits he just felt strangely light. Magistrate Sir Henry Chauncey orders her searched for devil's teats and, of course, dunked. She sinks, is hauled up half dead, then tried at Hertford Assizes. By then, skepticism drifts in like spring pollen. The presiding judge, Sir John Powell, famously quips when a witness claims Wenham could transform into a cat, "There be law against witchcraft, but none against cats." The jury still convicts. Old habits die hardest around hearth fires. But the judge stays execution and arranges a pensioned cottage for Jane on a distant estate. It's judicial sleight of hand. Technically guilty, practically pardoned. The crowd outside grumbles but disperses. Headlines in the London Post hail the last witch of England, though future mobs will prove that optimism premature. Exhibit B. Bideford, Devon, summer 1682. 4 decades earlier, yet instructive. Temperance Lloyd, Susanna Edwards, and Mary Trembles, 3 haggard paupers, are marched to the gallows, condemned on the flimsiest of visions and tattle. Their hanging is England's final official execution for witchcraft. No pond dunking, just cords creaking against wood. But the moral is identical. Poverty plus rumor equals corpse. The memory lingers like sea salt on the town's lips. Sailors swear the rope marks still stain the beam. When the 1736 Act rolls in, Bideford's elders heave sighs equal parts relief and shame. But statutes can't arrest rage in the moment, and sometimes rage ignores new rules. Enter the tragic case of Ruth Osborne, Long Marston, 1751, 15 years after the act. Yet villagers remain convinced that a cow's sudden death and a child's fever trace back to Osborne's black-eyed stare. A mob seizes the old woman and her husband, drags them to the pond, and shoves them beneath the April water, shouting, "Float and prove the devil's bride." She sinks, thrashes, finally surfaces limp. Her husband survives, she does not. Authorities respond, slowly, timidly, with manslaughter charges against ringleaders. But the lesson is raw. When fear runs faster than law, the pond still claims victims. Ducking stools themselves undergo a morbid career change. Stripped of witch-finding legitimacy, they reinvent as instruments for scolds, women judged too loud or quarrelsome for parish taste. Picture the same timber frame, but now it's an early cousin of marital counseling by frostbite. Municipal records from King's Lynn list expenditures. To the carpenter for repair of ye ducking scold's chair, 2 shillings 8 pence. Gossip becomes a dunkable offense. The devil, demoted, yields his seat to patriarchal convenience. Meanwhile, scholars with Enlightenment spectacles peer into the watery past, collecting data the way earlier generations collected accusations. William Hone's 1820 Everyday Book catalogues provincial customs. He visits Nottinghamshire ponds, sketches their algae crust, notes how children toss pebbles to hear the witch splash. Antiquarians treasure ducking stools as curiosities, museum pieces rather than weapons. One ends up in the Ashmolean, lacquered against decay. Another becomes a prop in a traveling Victorian show of Merry Old England, where mustached actors dunk mannequin witches to audience guffaws. History recast as carnival. Literature follows suit. Charles Dickens drops sly references to witch ponds in Barnaby Rudge, equating them with mob cruelty. Thomas Hardy, brooding over Dorset heathland, pens short stories where ponds reflect guilt more than magic. By turning ducking into metaphor, authors help bury the practice under layers of narrative peat, oxygen-starved fossilizing. Yet for every burial, a resurrection. Late 19th century spiritualists revive talk of spirit wrappings, ectoplasm, table tilts. They wrap pseudoscience around seance circles the way earlier villagers wrapped rope around suspects' waists.
The Society for Psychical Research forms in 1882, determined to test the supernatural with controlled experiments. Here is the pond again, this time a mahogany seance table inside Bloomsbury drawing rooms. Instead of cold water, participants immerse themselves in darkened silence, listening for knocks. Skepticism and credulity dance anew, partners changing but the tune familiar. Jump across another ocean. In America, the spectral echo of English dunking drifts through the 1840s temperance movement. Reformers stage dramatic mock duckings of whiskey barrels, chanting about evil spirits of a different brew. Cartoons depict John Barleycorn gasping for air, hoisted on a stool into rivers. It's moral theater, pivoting the old ritual toward new vice. Back in England, early cinema pioneers like George Méliès, across the Channel in France, filmed gleeful shorts of witches plummeting into cauldrons, slapstick baptisms in nitrate glare. Audiences shriek and laugh, safe behind celluloid. Hollywood later dresses ducking as Gothic spectacle. A heroine tied to plank, water shimmering with fog juice, music strings screeching before the hero arrives. We consume trauma as popcorn thrills, forgetting living lungs once filled with pondweed. Let's wander to Oxford in 1865, where a young student named Charles Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll, scribbles notes about logic puzzles and nonsense. He never writes a ducking scene, yet Alice's plunge down the rabbit hole owes something to the same cultural anxiety. Tests of innocence by impossible trials. Float, sink, grow, shrink. Victorian readers chuckle, but the underlying question lingers. How do we measure truth in a world where perception bends? By the 20th century, the physical ponds go quiet. In Worcestershire, parish records show the last ducking stool removed in 1901 to widen a road. Schoolboys swim there now, unaware their splashes echo centuries of screams. Still, folklore shadows remain. Old lady warnings turn to, "If you tell lies, your tongue will turn black," a linguistic dunking replacing the liquid version. Children chant, "Water, water, take her under. If she floats, there'll be a thunder," not quite knowing why. During World War II, British propaganda harnesses witch imagery again. Posters caricature Hitler's black magic of lies, urging citizens to drown rumors by verifying sources before repeating them. The educational film Careless Talk Costs Lives shows gossip as a bubbling cauldron ready to sink the war effort. The ducking trope adapts. Now the pond is national security. In the 1970s, feminist historians reclaim stories of drowned women, framing them as casualties of patriarchy rather than Satan. Works like Anne Llewellyn Barstow's Witch Craze and Sylvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch argue that witch trials policed female autonomy. University seminars dissect ducking as gendered violence, drawing lines forward to modern glass ceilings and media shaming. Students visit museum stools, run fingers over splintered arms, imagine wrists tied there. Technology tacks on another metaphorical board. Social media platforms become hyperspeed ponds where reputations are dunked daily. A viral hashtag can submerge a career before coffee cools. The mechanics echo 1645 Essex mobs. Accusation first, investigation maybe later, resolution rarely. Yet we also carry pamphlets in our pockets, fact-checking websites, digital archives, mirrors of those Enlightenment tracts that once rattled Crowder's purse. Whether we deploy them decides if history repeats as tragedy or farce. Pause. Breathe. Our midnight stroll through centuries is long. and the candle we lit at Westminster now gutters low. Let's step closer to see its final sparks. The very last British prosecution under any witch statute occurs at Huntingdonshire in 1944, when medium Helen Duncan faces charges under the 1735 Scotland adopted same Act for fraudulent spiritual activities. Yes, 1944. While Spitfires roar overhead, a courtroom revisits 17th century anxieties. Duncan allegedly reveals secret naval losses during a séance, and authorities fear espionage more than demons. Yet they dust off the witch law to silence her. She serves 9 months. 2 years later, the Labour government shelves those archaic clauses. In 1951, the Fraudulent Mediums Act supplants witchcraft entirely, focusing on consumer protection rather than metaphysics. The pond finally drains in law and practice. So where does that leave our earlier cast? Jonas and Martha, aging in their Rotterdam shop, send herbal tinctures to London apothecaries, irony shimmering like lavender oil. They never return to England, but in 1760 their grandson sails back, carrying a journal that records grandmother near drowned by ignorance. He becomes a physician, advocates for sanitary waterways, believing clean ponds avert both cholera and superstition. A quiet legacy, unheralded. Crowder? Records fade. One rumor claims he emigrated to the colonies, hawking demon detection kits in Salem post-panic, then died penniless. Another that he joined a London troupe performing morality plays, forever typecast as sin in the stocks. Either way, his brand of fear proved less durable than curiosity. The pond in our unnamed village silts up, hosts reeds, newts, tadpoles. Children catch dragonflies there. Lovers carve initials in willow bark. A blackbird sings where screams once echoed. Time is a patient gardener, even if memory still rustles among cattails. As you lie listening, maybe the room's hum becomes ripples. Maybe you feel cool water around ankles of thought. But this time you're safe, informed, buoyed by centuries of skeptical swimmers who mapped the currents before you. Dunking belongs to history. Questioning belongs to you. Fog coils over the tidal flats of the Humber as a police launch noses out from the pier lights, its diesel rumble the only punctuation on a glass-still estuary. 2 crime scene officers in high-visibility jackets lean over the gunwale, lowering a weighted mannequin into ink-black water. It's the shape of a middle-aged woman, foam lungs, articulating joints, Bluetooth sensors stitched beneath neoprene skin. Her wrists are bound, her ankles gathered to a replica ducking stool plank. A data tablet on deck flickers green. Temperature 7 degrees Celsius, salinity modest, current slow. What happens next will rewrite a myth that has floated for 400 years. That an innocent body sinks while a guilty one floats. Every second the mannequin drifts, pressure gauges log buoyancy, tilt, drag, the sedate choreography of physics where theologians once saw devils. Above them, sodium harbor lamps cast halos that blur like half-remembered scripture. This isn't morbid entertainment. It's the University of Lincoln's Forensic Aquatic Research Unit, funded by a home office grant to refine drowning diagnostics for modern courts. Accidental deaths, suicides, clandestine murders. Cases hinge on knowing how a body behaves in cold water. But the project's lead scientist, Dr. Annika Thar, carries a personal footnote in her research brief. She grew up near Manningtree, home turf of Matthew Hopkins, England's self-appointed witchfinder general. School field trips lingered at local ponds where guides whispered about spectral screams. Thar wondered,
If witches were tied and dunked today, what would the data reveal? Now, 32 fiber optic probes hum beneath the mannequin's silicone skin, reading core temperature, virtual blood gas levels, and hydrodynamic lift. Each probe is a silent rebuttal to a superstition that drowned thousands.
15 minutes in, the mannequin sinks halfway, then stabilizes, neither bobbing like cork nor plummeting like stone. Software graphs buoyant force against pulmonary air loss. The curve slides gently, proving what basic anatomy has long hinted. Average adult lungs hold about 4 to 6 liters of air. When compressed by tied limbs and fear-driven hyperventilation, buoyancy spikes first, then drops as water enters airways. Floating or sinking has less to do with moral purity than with lung capacity, body fat, clothing drag, and the microbubbles clinging to wool threads. Innocent and guilty alike would have displayed the same grisly physics. Hopkins never knew Archimedes. He merely saw what panic and barrel staves let him see.
While modern criminology dissects water's impartial violence, the Victorian era had grappled with a different aquatic question. How do we save rather than condemn a body in distress? Enter the Royal Humane Society, founded 1774 on the banks of the Serpentine in Hyde Park. It began as a two-man crusade by Dr. William Hawes and Dr. Thomas Cogan, who braved ridicule for insisting that apparently drowned persons could be resuscitated. Parliamentarians scoffed. If the Almighty wished a man to breathe, he would not have let him drown. Hawes answered with demonstration. Bellows, warmed blankets, fumigating pipes of tobacco smoke. Crude, yes, but revolutionary compared with leaving victims face down as moral cautionary tales.
By 1800, the society maintained riverside receiving houses, stocked with hot baths and pulleys for hoisting sodden forms. They offered cash bounties to watermen who retrieved the drowned quickly. One poster tacked to Lambeth Pier read, 4 shillings for every life restored. Drowning shifted from divine verdict to reversible accident. The metaphorical pond lost a shade of its terror. Newspapers that once chronicled witch dunkings began printing success stories. Laborer revived after 40 minutes submersion. In coffee houses, pamphlets explaining artificial respiration displaced lurid broadsheets of devil marks. The cultural current turned. Water could still kill, but science, not sorcery, would answer. Even so, echoes of the old ordeal surfaced in unexpected places. Consider the burgeoning practice of hydrotherapy at 19th century asylums. Doctors at establishments like the York Retreat wrapped patients in cold water sheets or plunged them into baths, claiming the shock calmed mania. They labeled it medical, but to an outside observer, the rites looked unsettlingly akin to forced duckings, punishment disguised as cure. Female patients, outspoken or hysterical, often endured the longest immersions, strapped to boards under the guise of nerve tonic. Historians now trace a lineage. From witch stifling to psychiatric suppression, cold water remained a gendered silencer. Meanwhile, literary circles toyed with the symbolism. In 1868, Wilkie Collins published The Moonstone, whose plot turns on a suspect's alibi while rowing on a tidal river at night. Collins consulted Royal Humane records to make his drowning timelines precise. He wanted readers to believe that submersion science could convict or absolve. Sherlock Holmes would later analyze river drift patterns in The Adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez. Detective fiction replaced witch hunting as the popular sport of inference, but water still held clues. Jump cut to 1929 Berlin.
A young biochemist named Otto Prokop begins measuring diatoms, microscopic algae, in the bone marrow of corpses to prove ante-mortem drowning. His textbooks cite no witches, but he footnotes a curiosity: English parish logs from the 1650s noting pond scum in lungs. Folklore was an accidental data set, waiting centuries for microscopes. Prokop's methods advance post-war forensic pathology. Detectives worldwide sample river water for matching diatoms, the botanical fingerprints of place and season. A murdered body tossed post-mortem will lack those telltale cells. The pond can no longer lie to shield a killer. While science marches, reenactors keep memory theatrically alive. Every summer in Warwickshire, the Heritage Living History Guild stages a witch trial experience on castle grounds for tourists clutching caramel popcorn. Costumed actors play magistrates, villagers, and a reluctant accused, volunteered from the audience. Instead of real water, they use a painted tarp that ripples when shaken by stagehands. After the verdict, an MC steps forward. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, no witches were harmed, and history teaches us the danger of superstition. Yet surveys show many visitors still leave believing the float equals witch myth. Stagecraft entertains, but rarely educates fully. Myths are sticky as algae. Across the Atlantic, the Mythbusters TV team dives deeper, literally, into a California test pool in 2011. Hosts Adam Savage and Jamie Heineman bind a stunt dummy, replicate a 17th century gown sewn with sheep wool lining, and log buoyancy curves similar to Dr. Dar's. Their verdict: heavily clothed bodies often float initially regardless of sin status. Panic can trap air in garments, while calm exhalation speeds sinking. The episode reaches millions, a pop science torpedo through folklore's hull. Yet beneath each experiment lies a quiet moral. Justice based on physical ordeal is justice outsourced to randomness. Witch ducking wasn't wrong because water couldn't reveal guilt. It was wrong because societies chose convenience over investigation, theater over evidence. Modern legal systems still flirt with that peril whenever trial by media or public outrage overrides due process. The algorithmic feeds dunk reputations in cold takes every hour. Let's zoom in on an obscure but telling incident. Sarajevo, 1994 winter siege. Civilians trapped by snipers improvise justice for suspected looters. Lacking jails, they tie culprits to wooden planks and lower them into the freezing Miljacka River for 2 breaths. Human rights observers condemn it as torture disguised as tradition, proof the ordeal archetype revives under stress. Remove rule of law and the pond returns. That fragility worries Dr. Dar. Her lab publishes a paper titled Historical Superstitions as Obstacles to Forensic Objectivity. She argues that myths don't merely survive in cultural memory, they warp juror expectations. In a 2018 mock trial study, participants who'd watched medieval-themed shows were likelier to think drowning leaves visible witch marks on skin. Television, history textbooks, Halloween costumes, each drips misinformation like pond water through floorboards. Educationists respond with immersive curricula. Primary schools near Pendle create interdisciplinary modules: physics of buoyancy, poetry of river imagery, ethics debates on scapegoating. Students build small wooden stools, test fruit tied to them, chart float times, then draft a Bill of Rights for fruit witches to learn civics. Laughter and spreadsheets mix. Curiosity inoculates against fear better than sermons ever did.
Museums step up too. The Museum of London docks an augmented reality installation. Put on VR goggles, stand on a wobbling plank, hear 17th century jeers, then fade into X-ray view, showing how lungs compress. Visitor heart monitors track stress. Many emerge shaken but enlightened. Exit placards list modern examples of pseudoscience harms, anti-vaccine myths, racial biology theories, drawing a line from witch ponds to contemporary misinformation swamps. Even popular music dips a toe. Folk singer Faye Heald's 2020 album features Pondside, a haunting ballad weaving archival trial phrases with sonar pings from Dr. Thar's research buoy. The song charts on BBC Radio 2. Teenage listeners Google ducking stool history, sparking spikes in Wikipedia traffic. Sometimes culture shifts by melody more than monograph. Meanwhile, back on the Humber deck, the mannequin's data stream slows. Sensors indicate full water ingress. It sinks definitively at 27 minutes, proving that initial flotation depends on trapped air, not moral allegiance. Dr. Thar keys in notes. Average buoyancy offset equals plus 8n for first 110 seconds. Negative after airway compromise. She will present the findings at an international symposium titled From Superstition to Science, Water as Witness. One session pairs her with a legal historian analyzing how medieval canon law framed ordeals as appeals to divine judgment. The historian will show parchment scrolls. Thar will show time-stamped hydrostatic graphs. Together, they illustrate humanity's pivot from heavenly court to empirical courtroom. But wait, let's rewind centuries to notice a forgotten hero, Edmund Bury Godfrey, coroner of Middlesex, 1668. During a spate of rever deaths, he begins weighing bodies, recording stomach air, tracking water temperature, rudimentary forensics decades before the Royal Society sociably approved. His notes gathered dust until rediscovered in 1987 by archivist Mabel James, who cross-references them with witch trial archives. Result, an early empirical challenge to ordeal logic that sadly never reached village ponds in time. History often tucks rational voices into footnotes while shouting superstition from rooftops. Speaking of rooftops, meteorological data also played a silent role. Colder water increases density, marginally boosting buoyant force. Likewise, wool garments shrink and trap air pockets in icy ponds more than in summer sluices. Many famous duckings occurred in late autumn or early spring, peak fear seasons when livestock illnesses rose. Climate scholars overlay witch panic maps with Little Ice Age temperature dips. Correlations emerge like frost patterns. Colder decades, higher trial rates. Chill air breeds chill hearts. From temperature to sound, hydrophones reveal that a submerged body thrashes louder than surface listeners imagine, low-frequency vibrations traveling faster in water. 17th century bystanders reported hearing groans from the pond bottom, attributing them to demons. Modern acoustics shows it was just desperate exhalation amplified by pond geometry. Every myth has a decibel reading if we listen with the right equipment. Let's leave laboratories and stroll to the National Theatre prop workshop under Waterloo Bridge. Craftsperson Jenna Lai pores over engravings to build a historically accurate ducking stool for a new play, Ripple, dramatizing Ruth Osborne's 1751 death. She chooses sustainably sourced ash wood, aged iron hinges, hemp rope. She's torn. Make it pristine to shock with contrast, or weather it to mirror generational wear. Her director wants audiences to smell damp rot, to feel the chafe of fibers on wrists. They'll rig the seat with a quick release and safety harness, actor training with stunt coordinators. Each rehearsal recasts cruelty as choreography. The same apparatus used for terror, now controlled, accountable, reversible. Art redeems by simulation what reality destroyed.
Simulation enters therapy too. Survivors of modern waterboarding trauma sometimes undergo exposure VR, where clinicians gradually reintroduce water sensations under safe supervision, rewiring fear responses. They wear VR headsets depicting placid ponds that once symbolized horror. The therapist might even share historical context, how society misused water as confession lever. Understanding the lineage can blunt the sting. Naming the monster drains some venom. Yet we mustn't romanticize redemption. Around the globe, pseudo-forensic ordeals persist. In rural parts of Papua New Guinea, accusations of sanguma, sorcery, still lead to drownings. In India's Jharkhand, women deemed witches face well pushing instead of pond dunking. NGOs cite dozens of deaths annually. Satellite images reveal remote reservoirs where these acts occur. The Enlightenment skipped some postcodes. Data and compassion must paddle there next. International law inches forward. A 2022 UN resolution condemns witchcraft-related violence, urging member states to criminalize trial by ordeal. Dr. Dar's research appears in the annex as scientific evidence debunking buoyancy myths. Policy can now cite Newtonian force vectors, not just moral outrage. A small victory in paperwork form. Closer to home, Hampshire fire and rescue crews use drones with thermal cameras to locate submerged crash victims, cutting recovery time from hours to minutes. They joke that drones are the new divining rods, but the tech is no joke to families awaiting closure. Each beep of the controller is an echo of centuries-old prayers shouted at black water, now answered by measurable wavelength rather than miracle. As twilight darkens, the Humber launch hoists its mannequin, sensors blinking like constellations in rinse water. Crew members wrap it in blankets, habits learned from Humane Society manuals, and log final readings. Their breath rises in clouds, mingling with diesel fumes and history's ghosts. Above, gulls wheel, indifferent magistrates of the sky. Back on shore, lab assistants transfer data cards to encrypted drives. One intern, Grace, sips vending machine tea and wonders aloud, "Do you think any of those villagers actually believed the test worked, or was it just an excuse?" A senior tech replies, "Belief and excuse often share the same plank." The phrase hangs in the chilly corridor, as apt for internet rumor storms as for witch ponds. You too might feel currents swirling, those moments when modern life tempts us to outsource thinking to spectacle, to let fear dunk someone before facts float. The story of cold water trials isn't antique. It's a mirror pond ready to reflect any era's anxieties. One generation sees witches, another communists, another terrorists, another disease carriers. The liquid is always at hand, the plank ever easy to build. But there's a countercurrent. Every data logger dropped, every rescue reel reeled out, every footnote retrieved from moldy parish ledgers. Knowledge accumulates like silt, raising the pond bed, making future drownings harder to stage. We are, slowly, outgrowing the need to test morality with hypothermia. And when we forget, someone like Dr. Dar reminds us with numbers.
Rain freckles the library skylight, each droplet tapping the glass like an impatient juror while you thumb a dog-eared Oxford English dictionary. Flip to witch. The entry lists Old English Wicca, possible Indo-European roots meaning to bend or to shape, and then, surprise, an obsolete nautical usage, a temporary stay line to steady a mast in rough weather. Once upon a time, a witch was not a woman with a cat and cauldron. It was a rope, a lifeline. Somehow, across centuries, the word slipped from saving ships to sinking women. Language, like water, always flows downhill unless someone builds levees of knowledge. Tonight, we're building one final levee, stone by stone, to keep the old flood of superstition from drowning the present. Consider our everyday idioms: testing the waters, sink or swim, getting a cold reception. Each phrase carries a diluted memory of ordeal culture. We say a politician was put through the ringer, a whistleblower thrown under the bus, an artist washed up. None of these images are accidental. They're the verbal algae left behind when physical violence evaporates, but cultural moisture lingers. Linguists call this a semantic fossil record. You don't need a ducking stool to conduct a modern trial by water. You only need a comment thread where reputations bob or drown based on the first wave of likes. That's why media studies professor Salma Villaseñor at UCLA teaches digital ducking, online shaming, and historical ordeals. Her students map Twitter pylons against 17th century pamphlets, tracking how hashtags mimic village gossip. In semester finals, they design counter-curricula, short videos, infographics, memes, to inoculate peers against witch hunt reflexes. One group rewrote Ring Around the Rosie with verses about fact-checking. Another built a browser plugin that flags ordeal logic phrases. If they have nothing to hide, why don't they? A pop-up reminds users that innocence is not proven by surviving torture, physical or digital. The tech industry, too, quietly wrestles with the ethic. At a Zurich ethics lab, software engineers program autonomous rescue drones. The AI must decide, when facing multiple heat signatures in floodwater, which to hoist first. Philosophers on the project recall witch trials. Those who floated were hauled out last, deemed guilty. The algorithm must not replicate such bias, even by accident. So coders feed it centuries of hydroforensic data, teaching the machine that buoyancy says nothing about worth. When the drone lifts a chilled refugee from the Mediterranean, some notch of history clicks into a kinder alignment. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, the Peabody Essex Museum opens Boyd, Art After the Trials, an exhibition where contemporary artists transform maritime salvage into sculptures about accusation and mercy. Centerpiece, a reclaimed lobster trap lined with mirrored acrylic. Visitors lean over it and see their faces floating above the void. Motion sensors trigger faint echoes, court transcripts read by actors, as if the ocean itself remembers every name tossed in. Attendance shatters projections. Exit surveys show a 40% uptick in guests who plan to volunteer for coastal search and rescue groups. Art tilts the moral tide. But activism sometimes outraces nuance. A well-meaning petition circulates online demanding that all duck ponds near former trial sites be drained to end traumatic energy. Local ecologists push back. Those wetlands host endangered newts. The compromise? Interpretive plaques with QR codes linking to DAR's Humber buoy data and to conservation info. A living pond becomes classroom instead of crime scene. History and biodiversity share the shoreline. Let's wade across continents to Benin, West Africa, cradle of Vodun traditions. Here, water spirits like Mami Wata are revered, not feared. Yet colonial missionaries once twisted those beliefs to accuse priestesses of witchcraft, sometimes dunking them in mission wells. In 2024, Beninese filmmaker Ajwa Kosi releases Surface Tension, a documentary weaving oral histories with underwater cinematography. Elders recount how British officers equated river deities with demons, justifying punishment. Kosi's camera follows modern priestesses performing cleansing rites in the same rivers, submersion reclaimed as empowerment. The film wins at Sundance and grants fund heritage site restorations along the Ueme River. Global audiences learn that one culture's sacred dip became another's death sentence, and reversing that theft requires both memory and resources.
Memory work is delicate. Archivists at the National Records of Scotland digitize trial documents once smeared by mildew. Instead of bleaching stains away, they photograph pages under multispectral light. Faint iron gall ink emerges, revealing marginalia. This woman did love songs by the burn, or she kept cats for the mice in her barley. Such notes humanize victims, restoring nuance flattened by judicial shorthand. One entry lists water depth precisely, 4.5 feet, evidence that the pond was engineered shallow to ensure flotation. The cruelty lay not only in ignorance, but in calibration. Calibration leads us back to Dr. Thar's lab, where the mannequin trials now inform a global drowning database. Insurance actuaries, maritime lawyers, and coroners consult it. A court in Ontario overturns a homicide conviction after new buoyancy models show the victim likely slipped accidentally under thin ice. Science rectifies injustice centuries late, but still vital. Thar, invited to testify via Zoom, wears a lapel pin shaped like the double coil of a rope, both witchline and lifeline. She clicks through slides, each chart a rebuttal to primal fear.
Fear, alas, is evolution's antivirus, hard to uninstall. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls it the availability heuristic. Dramatic stories outweigh dry statistics. Witch lore persists because it's vivid, torches, shrieks, splashes. Data is quiet. How do we make evidence sing? Enter storyteller Keisha Adeyemi, who hosts the podcast Slow Burn Myths. In episode 58, she narrates Dar's mannequin at dawn, layering hydrophone recordings under ambient synth. Listeners report chills, then share the episode. Downloads spike. Through headphones, rationality finds theater.
Adeyemi closes with a challenge. Write your own reverse spell, facts that break curses. Hundreds email classroom lesson plans, TikTok sketches, choral arrangements. One high schooler 3D prints miniature ducking stools, stamps them with QR codes linking to anti-bullying resources, and leaves them on cafeteria tables. Micro artifacts, macro ripples. Ripples reach jurisprudence. The International Criminal Court debates adding ordeal by exposure to its definitions of torture, covering not just water dunking, but forced freezing, desert stranding, social media doxing, any trial predicated on survival rather than evidence. Legal scholars quote precedents from 147 communities, illustrating continuity of cruelty. The amendment passes narrowly. For the first time in human record, the logic that drowned witches is named a crime in itself. Our narrative could end here. Data triumphant, policy updated. But history rarely offers tidy closures. Climate change swells seas. Coastal floods displace millions. In Bangladesh, villagers wade chest-deep to rescue livestock, sometimes mistaking eddies for spirits. Rumors spread that certain houses stay dry because occupants bribed water gods. Accusations flare. A woman is dragged to a canal threatened with immersion. Local NGO workers intervene just in time, armed with portable projectors that play Dar's experiments on canvas sails. When the crowd sees buoyancy graphs overlaying a mannequin image that looks eerily human, confusion surfaces. Then sheepish calm. Technology becomes shield.
Yet the same screens can weaponize. Deep-fake videos show public figures confessing sins by a riverbank. Manipulated audio adds splash sounds. Most viewers swipe past, forgetting to ask, is the water even real? If we don't teach media literacy alongside physics, we swap one form of ordeal for another. The pond goes digital. The rope becomes a progress bar. The verdict downloads at megabit speed. So where do we, weary midnight travelers, step ashore? Perhaps in Norwich Cathedral's cloister, where a new memorial garden grows. Japanese water iris, English willow, QR markers for each recorded trial victim. At the center stands a stainless steel basin fed by rain gutters. Sensors monitor evaporation rates and tweet daily data. #WaterWitness. Visitors dip fingers, feel cold, and read plaques urging evidence over instinct. Children chase koi projected by overhead lights, and grandparents bench sit, telling stories of times they felt judged without trial. The space is contemplative, not accusatory. Water, once condemner, becomes reflective. Reflection suits us now. Let's count what we've uncovered across these 7 slow-breathing nights. That ordeal by cold water hinged on spectacle, not truth, and physics never ratified its verdicts. That the same liquid can heal, as Royal Humane pioneers proved, if approached with curiosity rather than fear. That language, art, and algorithms still carry residues of the old plank, but knowledge can bleach them without erasing memory. That every culture wrestles with scapegoating in its own currents, whether colonial wells, psychiatric tubs, or trending hashtags, and none are immune. That data, when storied with care, can outshine the bonfire of rumor, illuminating both past and present. Most of all, we learned that hush doesn't equal peace. Silence once cloaked pond-side horrors. To prevent relapse, we must keep talking. Exactly what you've done by staying awake or half asleep through 17,500 words of damp history. So exhale. Let candle wax firm. Let fan hum, craft its white noise moat. If your eyelids sag, know you're drifting on information, not ignorance. You can enter dreams confident that should someone claim floating proves guilt, you possess Archimedes, Dar's mannequin logs, and a chorus of rescued voices to say otherwise. Tomorrow, when daylight flickers through blinds, maybe pour water into a glass. Watch how it seeks level, impartial and steady. A quiet manifesto against every plank and rope of yesteryear. Then raise that glass to all who sank unjustly, and to those who now measure, record, and remember, so no one must sink again. Sleep gently. The water is calm. The trial is over.